Don't go home today. That's what my sister whispered at 6 in the morning, her hand trembling on the kettle. I thought she was just being dramatic. I went to work. I drank stale coffee. By 6 that evening, my entire life was a crime scene. Listen to this. Cold linoleum pressing into bare heels. That was the first sensation of the day. The kitchen was freezing, the baseboard heater having given up sometime around 3 in the morning. I pulled my oversized cardigan tighter across my chest, shivering as I shuffled toward the coffee maker. Maeve was already there. She didn't look up when I entered. She was standing by the stove, gripping the handle of the kettle with both hands, her knuckles completely white. The water hadn't even begun to simmer, but she was staring at the stainless steel as if it were about to detonate. "Morning," I mumbled, reaching past her for a mug. My throat was dry, tasting of sleep and yesterday's cheap toothpaste. She didn't blink. Her hair, usually pulled back in a neat professional bun for her shift at the pharmacy, hung in a tangled, greasy curtain over her left shoulder. "Don't go home today," she whispered. I paused, mug suspended in midair. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her skin was the color of skim milk. There was a faint, erratic twitch at the corner of her right eye. "What are you talking about, Maeve?" I sighed. I didn't have the patience for this. It was a Tuesday. I had a quarterly audit at 9, and my manager, Paul, was already breathing down my neck about discrepancies in the Q2 freight logs. Just stay at work. Go to a friend's place. Book a motel. Don't come back here after 5. Her voice was completely hollow. It lacked her usual nervous energy. It sounded scraped out. "Maeve, I swear to God, if this is about the landlord again, I told you I transferred my half of the rent on Friday. If he's threatening eviction because of the noise complaint, it's not the landlord." She cut in. She let go of the kettle. The metal immediately gave a sharp, high-pitched shriek as the water hit a boil. Maeve flinched violently, covering her ears. I grabbed the kettle, yanking it off the burner. "Then what is it? I have a train to catch in 40 minutes. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, the rims raw and puffy. Jonathan called. The name dropped between us like a lead weight. Our father. We hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. Not since he showed up at our mother's funeral smelling of spearmint gum and expensive scotch, trying to charm the catering staff while we picked out a casket. My irritation instantly calcified into a dull, familiar dread. What did he want? He said. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. He said he was sorry. He said a lot of things. Just, don't come home today. Please. I scoffed. The sound was harsh, louder than I intended in the quiet kitchen. I'm not letting that parasite dictate my schedule. If he shows up, don't answer the door. Better yet, call the cops. He doesn't have a key anymore. I poured my coffee. It was sludge, bitter, and burnt, but I drank it fast, letting the heat burn the back of my throat. I left Maeve standing in the kitchen, a ghost haunting her own apartment. The commute was a masterclass in mundane misery. The subway car smelled intensely of wet wool, damp newspaper, and the sharp tang of ozone from the tracks. I wedged myself between a man snoring loudly into his chin and a woman aggressively peeling an orange, the citrus spray doing nothing to mask the underlying scent of unwashed bodies. Work was an anesthetic. 8 hours of staring at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred into gray lines. The fluorescent lights above my cubicle hummed with a specific, headache-inducing frequency that tasted faintly of metal in the back of my mouth. Every so often, the air conditioning would kick on, blasting a stream of recycled, dusty air directly onto the back of my neck. I forgot about Maeve. I forgot about Jonathan. I submerged myself in freight codes and deficit reports. By 5:30 p.m., my lower back was a solid block of pain, and my eyes were dry and scratchy. I packed my bag, eager for nothing more than a hot shower and a glass of cheap Merlot. I ignored the warning. It was my home. I paid half the rent. I wasn't going to let a cryptic phone call from a deadbeat father turn me into a fugitive in my own city. The walk from the subway station to our duplex was quiet. Too quiet. Usually by 6 in the evening, the neighborhood was alive with the sound of kids shouting, televisions blaring through open windows, and the clatter of dinner being made. Today, the street felt vacuum-sealed. I turned the corner. Our front gate was hanging open, the latch bent backward. My pace slowed. The pavement beneath my boots suddenly felt uneven, spongy. I walked up the concrete path. The front door was slightly ajar. The wood around the deadbolt wasn't splintered, it hadn't been kicked in. Someone had used a key, but there was a fresh, jagged scratch down the painted surface, as if something heavy and sharp had been dragged against it. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the stench of death you see in movies. It was the smell of disturbed dust. Decades of it, suddenly kicked up into the air. Beneath that, a sickly sweet undercurrent of sandalwood and oxidized copper. Jonathan's signature cologne. "Maeve," I called out, my voice cracked. Silence. I stepped into the living room, or what used to be the living room. It was utterly hollowed out. The threadbare sofa we had scavenged from a thrift store, gone. The heavy oak bookshelf that belonged to our mother, gone. Even the faded Persian rug had been rolled up and taken, leaving behind a stark, rectangular outline of clean hardwood, surrounded by a thick border of gray grime. It wasn't a robbery. Robbers are messy. They tear through drawers. They dump things on the floor. This was a surgical extraction. Everything of value, everything with mass, had been systematically removed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. "Maeve!" I screamed. I ran to the kitchen. Empty. The kettle still sat on the cold stove. I bolted up the stairs, my boots hammering against the wooden treads. The hallway upstairs felt cavernous without the small console table and the framed prints that usually hung there. The hooks on the wall were bare, leaving small holes in the drywall like missing teeth. I burst into Maeve's bedroom. She was sitting in the center of the room. The mattress, the bed frame, her dresser, all gone. She was sitting cross-legged on the bare floorboards, hugging her knees to her chest. She was clutching a crumpled piece of thick, watermarked paper. Her face was turned away from the window, but in the dim, slanting evening light, I saw the dark, blooming bruise swelling shut her left eye. A trickle of dried blood crusted from her nostril down to the corner of her mouth. She looked up at me. Her expression wasn't terrified anymore. It was entirely blank. "I told you," she whispered, her voice raspy, like she had swallowed glass. "I told you not to come home." My bag slipped off my shoulder, hitting the floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. I didn't rush to her. I didn't drop to my knees and hold her like a good sister should. I froze, my brain short-circuited, refusing to process the input. The bruise on her face, the empty room, the smell of dust, and that cloying sandalwood cologne. My stomach gave a violent, sickening lurch. A rush of cold saliva flooded my mouth. I turned and bolted for the bathroom. I didn't make it to the toilet. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink and threw up. It was violent and ugly, my body rejecting the stale coffee and the sheer terror. The smell of gastric acid mixed with the faint scent of mildew from the shower curtain. I heaved until my ribs ached, spitting bile down the drain. I turned the tap on, letting the icy water run over my trembling hands. I splashed my face, shivering as the water soaked into the collar of my shirt. "Breathe," I told myself. "Just breathe." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, leaving a smear of water across my cheek, and walked back into Maeve's room. She hadn't moved. She was still staring at the wall, the crumpled paper white against her pale knuckles. I knelt down in front of her. Up close, the damage was worse. The skin around her eye was a mottled landscape of purple and yellow. Her lip was split. "Who did this?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to me, flat, guttural. "Did he do this? Did Jonathan hit you?" Maeve slowly shook her head. "No. The men he sent did." "Men?" She uncurled her fingers, letting the crumpled paper fall to the floor. I picked it up. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me a few seconds to smooth it out enough to read the dense, legal print. It was a loan agreement. A massive, staggering sum. Commercial backing. high-interest predatory lending from a firm I had never heard of, but whose letterhead looked expensive and intimidating. At the bottom of the last page, there were 3 signatures. Jonathan's looping, arrogant scrawl, Maeve's careful, rounded cursive, my own sharp, jagged print. I didn't sign this, I breathed, staring at my own forged name. I haven't seen him in months. Neither have you. He didn't need us to, Maeve said, her voice deadened. He had our social security numbers. He had Mom's old business tax IDs. He used the duplex as collateral. He used everything. I stared at the paper. The numbers didn't make sense. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. For what? He doesn't have a business. He's a failed real estate broker. Debts, Maeve whispered. He's been gambling again, not at casinos, private games, dangerous people. He took out this loan to pay them off, and then he defaulted. He took the cash and he ran. A sharp, freezing pressure clamped around my lungs. And the men? Collectors, she choked out. A tear finally spilled over her lower lash line, cutting a clean track through the dust on her cheek. They came at noon, 4 of them. They had a key. He gave them a key. Harper. They said the furniture, Mom's jewelry, the electronics, it was just a down payment, an act of good faith to cover the interest. And they hit you? I tried to stop them from taking Mom's ashes. Her voice broke, folding in on itself. The big one, he backhanded me, told me we have until the 1st of the month to vacate the property, or they'll start collecting pieces of us instead of furniture. Anger, pure and white-hot, finally pierced through the shock. But it wasn't directed at the men. God help me, in that moment, it was directed at her. Why didn't you call the police? I screamed. I scrambled back, getting to my feet, the paper crinkling in my fist. Why the hell did you just let them in? Why didn't you call 911? Maeve flinched as if I had struck her. I couldn't. They had the paperwork, Harper. They said if I involved the cops, they'd show them the fraud. They'd show them how we helped our father embezzle the funds. They know where I work. They know where you work. It's a forgery, I yelled, pacing the empty floorboards. A handwriting expert would clear us in a day. And what happens to us in that day, Harper? Maeve snapped back, sudden venom in her voice. She pushed herself up to her knees. Do you think these people care about handwriting experts? They are criminals. They told me if they see a badge near this house, they'll burn it down with us inside. I stopped pacing. The silence of the empty house crashed back down over us. I looked at my sister, bruised, broken, sitting on the floor of a room that had been stripped down to the joists. Our mother's antique clock, the one that used to tick soothingly from the hallway, was gone. The TV was gone. My laptop, the small safe in the closet where we kept our passports, and the deed to the duplex, gone. Jonathan hadn't just stolen from us. He had weaponized our identities. He had served us up on a silver platter to a pack of wolves so he could slip out the back door. I dropped the paper. I felt heavy. My bones felt like they were filled with wet sand. We can't stay here, I said quietly. We don't have anywhere to go, Maeve replied. My bank account. I checked it on my phone before they took it. It's frozen. Jonathan was a joint signer on my checking account from when I was in college. I never took him off. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I logged into my banking app. Balance, negative $432.50. A garnishment order. The lenders had already hit the accounts attached to the forged loan. I started to laugh. It wasn't a humorous sound. It was a dry, scraping noise that scraped my throat raw. I laughed until I had to lean against the doorframe to keep from falling over. Harper, stop, Maeve pleaded, covering her ears. Please stop. I couldn't. The sheer absurdity of it. I had spent 8 hours tracking misallocated shipping containers to save a multi-billion-dollar corporation a few $1,000s, while my own father was systematically dismantling my life, taking the literal bed out from under my sister. I stopped laughing. I looked at the dark windows. Pack whatever clothes they left you in a trash bag, I said, my voice suddenly very calm. We're going to a motel. I have cash in my emergency kit in my car. And then what? Maeve asked, pulling herself up. She looked small, so incredibly small. I didn't answer immediately. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. And then I said, "We find him." The motel room smelled intensely of cheap bleach and old cigarette smoke, a stubborn phantom odor that clung to the synthetic floral bedspread. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in protest under my weight. It was 3 a.m. Maeve was asleep in the other bed, her breathing ragged and uneven. Every few minutes she would twitch, pulling the thin sheet tighter around her shoulders. I hadn't slept. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing the stark, rectangular dust outline of the missing rug on our living room floor. The police had been exactly as useless as Maeve predicted, though we didn't tell them about the loan sharks. I had gone to the precinct at midnight, claiming we had been robbed by our estranged father. The desk sergeant, a man who looked like he sweated pure cholesterol, had barely looked up from his monitor. The station smelled of stale donuts, wet wool, and floor wax. "Did he have a key?" the sergeant had asked, typing loudly. "Yes, but name on the lease?" "Mine and my sister's, but he's our father." "Civil matter," the cop grunted, hitting the enter key with unnecessary force. "Unless you have a restraining order, family members taking property is a dispute for small claims court, not a criminal burglary, especially if there's no sign of forced entry." "He took my mother's ashes," I had said, my voice dangerously tight. The cop paused, looking up at me with dead, fish-like eyes. "Look, lady, I can file a report, but no detective is going to kick down doors over domestic property disputes. Get a lawyer." I had walked out without filing the report. The law wasn't built to protect people like us. It was built to protect property. And on paper, Jonathan knew exactly how to make it look like the property was his to gamble with. Sitting in the motel room, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the parking lot lights bleeding through the thin curtains, I stopped waiting for someone to save us. I opened my work laptop. It was the only thing I had on me when I left the house, saved because it was in my bag. I am a logistics auditor. My entire career is based on the premise that nothing moves without leaving a trace. People think the digital world is a cloud, ethereal and untethered. It's not. It's a series of rigid, heavy chains. Money moves through servers located in physical buildings. Mortgages require IP addresses and notary stamps. A man doesn't simply vanish, especially not a man who owes hundreds of thousands of dollars and likes expensive scotch. I started with the loan document. I had photographed it before we left the house. The lender was listed as Apex Capital Holdings. A quick search revealed it wasn't a bank. It was an LLC registered in Delaware, utilizing a registered agent service to hide the owners. Standard shell company tactics. But Jonathan wasn't a mastermind. He was a lazy, arrogant narcissist. He wouldn't have built a complex laundering scheme. He would have taken the path of least resistance. I logged into a skip tracing database I used for work to track down AWOL freight contractors. It was a gray area tool, scraping public records, utility bills, and credit inquiries. I punched in Jonathan's social security number. I had memorized it years ago when I had to untangle his mess from my mother's medical bills. The search bar spun. A small blue circle chasing its own tail. Ping. A new address populated. It wasn't in Mexico. It wasn't in some remote, off-the-grid cabin. It was an address in Oak Ridge Estates, a gated community less than 40 miles away. The utility account was opened 3 days ago. I stared at the screen. The audacity of it made the acid rise in my throat again. He hadn't fled. He had upgraded. He didn't open the account in his name, of course. The primary name on the electric bill was Evelyn Vance. Evelyn, the 26-year-old Pilates instructor he had brought to my mother's wake. I closed the laptop. The quiet hum of the motel's mini-fridge was the only sound in the room. I didn't feel angry anymore. The fiery, chaotic rage from the house had burned out. What replaced it was something cold, dense, and incredibly sharp. By 7 a.m., I was in my car. I left Maeve a note, telling her to keep the deadbolt locked and not to open the door for housekeeping. The drive took 45 minutes. The transition from our gritty industrial neighborhood to the sprawling affluence of Oak Ridge was jarring. The potholes disappeared, replaced by smooth black asphalt. Fast food joints gave way to artisanal bakeries and boutique fitness studios. I parked my beat-up 2012 Honda Civic across the street from the main entrance of the gated community. I didn't try to go in. The security guard in the booth was already eyeing my rusted quarter panel with suspicion. Instead, I rolled down the window and waited. The morning air here smelled different. It smelled of freshly laid mulch, chlorine from backyard pools, and the damp, metallic ticking of automated sprinkler systems. It smelled like money. At 8:15 a.m., a silver Range Rover glided up to the security gates from the inside. The gates parted smoothly, silently. As the SUV turned onto the main road, passing my parked car, I saw him. Jonathan. He was driving. He was wearing a crisp, pale blue linen shirt. He looked tanned. He looked rested. In the passenger seat, Evelyn was laughing, applying lip gloss in the sun visor mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped. A violent tremor ran up my arms. I wanted to slam my foot on the gas. I wanted to T-bone that pristine silver SUV, crush the driver's side door, and watch him bleed out onto the leather seats. My foot hovered over the accelerator. My heart was hammering against my ribs, frantic and wild. "Do it," a voice in my head screamed. "End it right now." But I didn't. I slowly let my foot off the pedal. Ramming his car wouldn't bring Mom's ashes back. It wouldn't pay off the loan sharks who were currently hunting my sister. It would just put me in jail, leaving Maeve completely defenseless. Jonathan didn't fear violence. He didn't fear the law. He feared poverty. He feared embarrassment. He feared losing the comfortable, parasitic life he had spent decades cultivating. I watched the Range Rover disappear down the oak-lined street. He had taken everything that grounded me. He had destroyed my home, ruined my credit, and put a target on my family's back. He thought because he changed his zip code and hid behind a gate, he was safe. He thought his daughters were just collateral damage, weak, predictable, and paralyzed by the mess he left behind. I put the Honda in drive and slowly pulled away from the curb. I wasn't going to hit him with a car. That was too fast, too merciful. I was going to dissect his new life. I was going to find out where this new money came from, who Evelyn really was, and what lies he had spun to get into this neighborhood. I was going to locate the foundational pillars of his new reality, and I was going to quietly, methodically rot them from the inside out. By the time he realized the house was collapsing, the doors would already be locked from the outside. I pulled onto the highway, heading back to the motel. The plan was messy, vague, and heavily reliant on my ability to hack municipal databases without getting caught. But for the first time in 24 hours, the crushing weight in my chest lifted just a fraction. I had a project. 3 days blurred into a single caffeine-soaked hallucination. The motel room became my entire universe, shrinking down to the 14-inch glowing rectangle of my laptop screen. The carpet beneath my bare feet felt permanently damp, a sticky synthetic fiber that smelled vaguely of old pennies. Maeve barely spoke. She sat on her bed, watching daytime television on mute, periodically pressing a plastic bag of melting ice against her cheek. The yellowing edge of her bruise was beginning to spread down her jawline like a watercolor stain. I ignored her quiet weeping. I had to. If I stopped typing to comfort her, the fragile, blinding momentum keeping me upright would shatter. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have muscle. But I had 12 years of experience finding money that people didn't want found. Jonathan's grift was remarkably unoriginal. He was always a creature of habit. I started pulling public property records for Oak Ridge Estates. The lease for the house wasn't in his name. It wasn't in Evelyn's either. It was leased to a corporate entity, Blue Horizon Consulting, LLC. A quick dig through the state's registry of corporations gave me the managing director. It was a man named Gregory Hayes, Evelyn's father. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the cheap plastic keys clacking loudly in the quiet room. I pulled up Gregory Hayes. He owned a mid-sized commercial paving company, Solid Wealth. Not billionaire status, but certainly enough to buy a silver Range Rover and bankroll a gated community lease for his daughter's charming new fiancé. Jonathan was running a textbook parasite maneuver. He was using the loan he took out against our duplex to project the illusion of massive wealth, buying expensive dinners, designer clothes, an engagement ring to secure a permanent meal ticket with the Hayes family. But there was a fatal flaw in his accounting. The loan sharks at Apex Capital didn't want a duplex in a rundown neighborhood. They wanted liquid cash. The furniture and Mom's ashes were just leverage to inflict emotional pain, assuming Maeve and I would somehow magically produce the money to save ourselves. They were shaking the wrong tree. I just needed to show them the orchard. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes until bursts of static popped in my vision. My stomach gave a low, hollow growl. The half-eaten styrofoam container of greasy lo mein on the nightstand had solidified into a congealed block, but I forced myself to eat a cold, salty forkful anyway. Fuel. That was all it was. I drafted an email. I set up a burner Proton mail account and found the registered agent contact for Apex Capital Holdings. I didn't write a plea. I didn't beg for my sister's life. Debt collectors don't speak the language of empathy. They speak the language of leverage. Subject: Jonathan, last name, account #44892, asset relocation. I kept the tone clinical, detached, like a disgruntled former business partner handing over a tip. I attached a heavily redacted file. I included the Oak Ridge address. I included the license plate of the Range Rover. Then I delivered the kill shot. I attached a copy of a wire transfer receipt. I had spent 6 hours that morning manipulating a PDF from my own company's freight invoices, altering the metadata and the routing numbers to make it look flawlessly authentic. The receipt showed a transfer of $400,000 from Jonathan's personal offshore account, which didn't exist, into a trust managed by Evelyn's father. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie wrapped in the undeniable truth of his current location and his new wealthy fiancé. I hit send. The room felt suddenly suffocating. The low hum of the mini-fridge sounded like a jet engine. "What did you just do?" Maeve asked. Her voice was raspy from disuse. She was staring at me from the bed, the ice pack resting on her lap. "I balanced the ledger," I said, closing the laptop. The hinge clicked shut with a sharp snap. "Get dressed. We're going for a drive." The air in Oak Ridge was thick with the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt. I parked the Honda 2 blocks away from Jonathan's leased house, wedging it between a massive landscaping truck and a towering oak tree. It was 4 p.m. on a Thursday, prime time for neighborhood stillness. Maeve sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled to her chest. She was shaking. "Harper, please. If those men are here, they'll kill us. They said they'd kill us." "They don't care about us anymore," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the sweeping driveway of Jonathan's house. "We are a dried-up well. We always were." We waited. The inside of the car grew stiflingly hot. Sweat trickled down my spine, gluing my cotton shirt to the cheap fabric of the car seat. A lawnmower droned somewhere in the distance. At 4:20 p.m., a black, late-model Tahoe rolled slowly down the pristine street. It didn't belong here. It was too boxy, too utilitarian, dusted with a fine layer of highway grime that stood out against the polished luxury cars of the neighborhood. It pulled into Jonathan's driveway, blocking the silver Range Rover in. 4 men got out. Even from a distance, the shift in the air was palpable. They didn't walk like delivery men or contractors. They walked with a heavy, deliberate entitlement. The same men who had taken our mother's ashes. Maeve let out a sharp, choked gasp and ducked below the dashboard. I didn't move. I kept my eyes wide open. The biggest man, wearing a tight polo shirt that strained against his shoulders, didn't bother knocking. He kicked the heavy mahogany front door. The sound cracked through the quiet suburban air like a gunshot. The door didn't give. He kicked it again, harder. The wood splintered around the lock and the door swung violently inward. They filed inside. Silence descended again. A heavy, pregnant silence. 3 minutes passed. Then the screaming started. It wasn't Evelyn. It was Jonathan. A high-pitched, reedy sound of absolute, primitive terror. It was a sound I had never heard my father make. He had always been so composed, so impeccably armored by his own arrogance. A crash echoed from the house, something glass and very large shattering against hardwood. Then they dragged him out. Two of the men had Jonathan by the arms. His pale blue linen shirt was torn down the front. His face was a mask of panic, his slicked back hair falling wildly into his eyes. He was missing a shoe. Evelyn ran out after them. She was hysterical, clutching her phone, screaming at them to let him go. The big man turned. He didn't hit her. He just pointed a thick, calloused finger at her face and said something. I couldn't hear the words, but the physical reaction was instantaneous. Evelyn stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. She lowered her phone. She took a slow, terrified step backward. Jonathan was pleading now. He fell to his knees on the manicured lawn, the lush green grass staining his expensive slacks. He was sobbing, clutching at the big man's pant leg, begging. I rolled the window down a crack. I don't have it! Jonathan's voice carried down the street, raw and desperate. The girl's father has it! I swear to God, it's in the trust. The big man looked down at him with an expression of profound boredom. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The forged loan agreement. He dropped it onto the grass in front of Jonathan. Then he reached into the Tahoe and pulled out a heavy steel crowbar. He didn't hit Jonathan. He walked over to the silver Range Rover. With a casual, almost lazy swing, he brought the crowbar down on the windshield. The safety glass spider-webbed with a sickening crunch. He hit the hood, leaving a massive, jagged dent. He moved to the headlights, smashing them into plastic dust. Jonathan stayed on his knees, weeping loudly into his hands. Evelyn had retreated to the porch, staring at the man she was going to marry as if he were a rotting carcass. The men didn't linger. The big one tossed the crowbar onto the ruined hood of the SUV. They piled back into the Tahoe, reversed smoothly out of the driveway, and drove away, passing my parked Honda without a second glance. I watched Jonathan. He was completely broken. The facade was gone. The affluent neighbors were slowly emerging from their houses, phones in hand, staring at the ruined man crying on the grass. The illusion was dead. Evelyn's father would find out about the supposed trust. The police would be called. The house of cards had spectacularly, violently collapsed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a sudden rush of cinematic justice. I felt exhausted. My eyes burned. My back ached. Is it over? Maeve whispered from the floorboard. I put the car in drive. Yeah, it's over. We didn't get the duplex back. The landlord, spooked by the eviction notice and the missing front door, terminated our lease. We never recovered the furniture or Mom's ashes. They were collateral damage in a war we never asked to fight. We moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner. It smells permanently of industrial starch and hot iron. I sleep on a pull-out couch that digs into my ribs. Maeve's bruise faded to a dull yellow, then disappeared entirely. She went back to the pharmacy. I went back to auditing freight logs. We don't talk about Jonathan. We don't talk about Oak Ridge. But sometimes, when the AC kicks on and the fluorescent lights hum just right, I look at the numbers on my screen. I see how easy it is to move decimal points, how simple it is to rewrite a reality. I feel that cold, sharp density sitting perfectly still in my chest, and I know that whatever softness I had left died on the floor of our empty living room. I am imperfect, I am scarred, but I am never, ever going to be a victim again. That's the reality of blood ties. Sometimes they don't bind you, they bleed you dry. We survived, but survival isn't always pretty. If this raw, unfiltered story resonated with the messy, darker parts of your own life, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who understands that the real villains rarely wear masks. And don't forget to subscribe for more grounded, unapologetic stories about what happens when ordinary people are pushed past their breaking point.